Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is season 2 of the Everything is Fine podcast. We're so happy you're here to join us. I'm your host, Matt Ebersol,
I am your host, Sean Wilson.
and today is the premiere of season 2. We are so thrilled to be back. Sean, how are you doing today on this wonderful, wonderful day?
I am doing absolutely fine, in every sense of the word. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm also doing pretty good. It's been good to have a couple weeks off because even though for y'all, all of our listeners, these episodes might seem pretty close together. It's like, wait, season 1 just ended. There's already season 2. Well, what you don't know is that we recorded a lot of the end of season 1 stuff well before it was released, so that we've actually have not recorded an episode for well over a month now. So it's very nice to be back in the groove. I'm excited. Today, if you are wondering, we are fulfilling our promise to y'all. We are going to be talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe starting today with Phase 1 of the MCU. The first 6 movies that started this absolute mega franchise that has taken over our entire pop culture lexicon. It's going to be great. It's going to be a really, really fun time.
Yes, it will. We begin this journey. It's just the two of us today. It's just like the early days of season 1. We will have some guests on for phases 2 and 3. We're not covering phase 4 because nothing's out for phase 4. So, officially.
Yeah, no.
So, we have a lot of advertisements and trailers and things that are just being given to us by Marvel every day, but we have nothing concrete. We are not watching anything yet, and why would we even start phase 4 if we even got one movie? So, we're leaving that for the future.
Plus,
and perhaps one day
we already covered half of it with. Plus, we already covered half of it with our WandaVision episode, so that's already well done and out of the way. The only thing we haven't talked about is Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I'll give you my quick review right now. It was all right. Wasn't great.
Yeah.
Wasn't bad. It was all right.
Falcon and the Winter Soldier was fun at times, and that's it. It was good.
Exactly.
WandaVision deserved an episode from us because WandaVision was twisty and turned, and it did so many new things. It built a character from the ground up in a new way that we already had after she had gotten so torn down. Whereas Captain and can't even speak. Whereas Falcon and the Winter Soldier was basically just, hey, remember this subplot? We're gonna just show you what happened, and it was good. I liked John Walker. I liked the chemistry between Bucky and Sam. It's just, it was very, very formulaic Marvel, whereas WandaVision broke the mold. So that's why we're not really covering Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It was good. We're not saying we don't like it. We say go watch it. It's just, there's not a lot to explain. There's not a lot to cover. You can watch it yourself and get everything you need.
Yep, and also, when this episode comes out, I believe will be only a couple days from the release of Loki, which is coming out on Wednesday, June 9th, I believe is the day. So we're coming up close on the next Marvel show. Falcon and the Winter Soldier ended a couple weeks ago. We've been without a Marvel show now for a couple weeks, and with WandaVision and Falcon, those pretty much, one ended, one began right away. So we've had a bit of a break in between these Falcon, Winter Soldier, and Loki, so I'm excited to see that. But we're not talking about Phase 4, as we said. We're here to talk about Phase 1, the one that started it all, the one that absolutely no one saw coming. No one thought this would be a huge success, and it ended up being a tremendous, tremendous achievement by the Marvel Studios team. But before we get to Phase 1, Sean, I believe we have some headlines that we want to discuss in the world of pop culture. We've had a few weeks off of not keeping track, but granted, we're not going to be talking about a month's worth of news, just recent stuff within the past few days. So, Sean, take it away.
Yes. So, we just have a few things for the recent time of this recording. We are recording this on the 3rd of June, for full disclosure. So, we have things surrounding recent news from now. The 2 or 3 weeks that we did nothing, you just would have had to have experienced that yourself. But with the news that we have today, before we even get into it, we have a very special birthday in pop culture. According to his fake driver's license, McLovin turns 40 years old today. So,
happy birthday, McLovin.
Happy 40th birthday, you beautiful organ donor, you. Into the actual news. So, first things first, God of War 2 has been delayed to 2022, and basically it's just, hey, we're not
Another one.
ready. We want to make sure this is the best thing possible before we give it to you guys. We're also kind of waiting on the PS5 to
Again,
go back into stock. I will say this though.
yeah. Again, it's just another. Go ahead.
I will say this. I know what you're going to say. It's another delay on a video game. I'm happier that more devs are delaying their games because they know they're not ready. Because after the big failure last year with CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk, I would rather be told it's not ready than get it to me in the worst possible shape.
I agree with that. Here's my problem, and I've said this multiple times on this very show on many different episodes. I have no problem with a game developer delaying a game to make sure it's fine. I actually admire that. I would rather have a great game. I would rather wait longer for a great game than get a really crappy game right away. I think you have to. It's the best things in life are worth waiting for. My problem is they keep planting flags when clearly these dates that they're planting as release dates are not the ones that are going to be met. So why even release that to the public? If you say that God of War is coming out late 2021 and then it misses it and then it keeps missing it and then it keeps missing it, why even say that in the first place if you actually have no idea when your game's going to be ready? Same thing with the new Halo game, same thing with the new Lego Star Wars game. They just keep saying it's coming out this day and you're like, "Yeah, all right." And then they delay it again. And they're like, "Well, all right, I guess we'll wait." And then they plant another flag, and it's like, that's the new date. And then they say, "Nope, we're delaying it again." That's what gets me annoyed because they get my hopes up. But
Yeah.
that's mini rant over.
More game studios should take the Square Enix approach and just not say anything. Never work on a game.
Yeah.
But no, yes. So the God of War delay. Recently,
I'm
Sean.
excited for that game, though. I am excited for that game.
I'm
That
very
game's gonna be
excited.
good.
Recently, Sean Bean just found out how Game of Thrones ended, and his response was he got a little lost along the way at times, but he's very happy for his children and the fate of Winterfell. So, he's
Yeah.
happy. He doesn't know what's going on, but he's happy about it.
I mean, I'm sure he doesn't really care about how the show ended. They killed him off. Spoiler alert: they killed him off very quickly. So it's not like he was super attached to wanting to make sure the story was progressed, to honor. I'm sure he forgot about Game of Thrones a very long time ago, as shown by the fact that he literally just now watched the finale that's already been out for 2 years. I'm happy he enjoyed it, though. A lot of us didn't, but, if you enjoyed the Game of Thrones finale, if you enjoy anything that I don't like, I'm very happy for you. I'm happy you find enjoyment in things. I just don't find enjoyment in the Game of Thrones finale. But I'm happy that Sean Bean did. Happy for his kids. Because his kids were the heroes of the story in terms of how the writers wanted us to feel. The show ended with Bran... I don't want to spoil everything. But the show ended with all of his kids' arcs being pretty well completed. That was the focus.
Well,
so I
except for
understand
one.
how he's
Except for
happy
one.
about that.
Except for one. Except for one.
Oh.
That's a joke. So moving on. IGN's
Terrible.
official.
I'm shaking my head if you're wondering.
I couldn't resist. IGN's official review for The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It is out. They gave it a 6 out of 10. They said it was a clever way to reinvent the franchise. However, it doesn't have the trademark scares, and that's why it's so low. I mean, The Conjuring kind of was like one of those film franchises that when it came out started to revitalize the mainstream horror genre in its own special way.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're gonna add a next installment that reinvents it, you gotta keep the trademark going. And apparently, it lost that scary spark. So.
Yeah, I enjoy the first 2 Conjuring movies. The spin-offs are what kind of make me not care anymore because they've just not been good. I think The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2 have been both really, really good horror films. I think they're both very unique, and again, they were kind of foundational pieces as to what horror movies do now. They were very so low funds, a no-name director really rising up, a very good cast. And it was scary, and I enjoyed that. 6 out of 10 is about what I expected from this movie because no horror movie like this is ever, like, super critically acclaimed unless it's, like, some really out-of-the-box horror film like Get Out or Hereditary or something like that. a normal franchise horror piece, I normally expect good ones to be in this 6 to 7 out of 10 range. So that makes me happy that at least critics are finding enjoyment in it and that it wasn't a complete failure.
Yeah, I will say this fun fact: the Conjuring, the original Conjuring, was one of the first modern era, or at least modern when it came out, like a couple years after it came out. One of the first modern era horror films that I was able to like man up and sit and watch all the way through in one sitting with a group of friends. Because until a couple years ago, I did not like horror films. I still will never go and see a horror film in a theater because I'm just going to be a public menace the entire time, just freaking out and jumping out of a seat. I have grown though, ever since being dragged through that movie, and by extension, the rest of the Conjuring verse. I have started to appreciate horror in a much greater light, and I've actually sat through a few horror films on my own. So yeah, has a little special place.
You only get Sean. You only get Sean to watch a horror film in a theater unless you go into that movie theater expecting to see a different movie.
That is a real story that happened. We won't. We'll tell. We're not going to tell the whole story now, but long story short, early in college, me and Matt wanted to go see a shadow audience showing of the Rocky Horror Picture Show on our college campus, and we went to the wrong theater, and we saw A Quiet Place. And I saw A Quiet Place for the first time, and I was not prepared. It was good, but I
had already
wasn't prepared
seen that
for it.
movie, so it was fine.
So imagine us two dressed as like, what'd you go as? Like a green M&M?
I went as the green M&M. I had a green hoodie, green shorts, and I had an M on my chest because I didn't have a costume, so I made it up.
And I lacked the face paint and the makeup, but I essentially looked like Jack Nicholson's the Joker. So yeah.
Yep.
That was the two of us in a normal theater in the campus like union, like the student union, with strangers watching this movie. And I will never forget the
One
look
of
on
the
your
funniest
face.
things ever.
I'll never forget the look on your face when the modern day
Oh my god.
logo showed up on screen. You're like, "Oh, this isn't it," and you just stared at me because you knew what the movie was. I didn't. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, moving on. Moving on from that.
Moving on.
Seth Rogen is rebooting the TMNT. I have literally nothing
I'm really
else.
interested to see what this is.
I have nothing else written.
Yeah, this.
I just saw it the other day, and he's like, "Oh, he's working with Nickelodeon. He's gonna reboot the TMNT for a movie." I'm like, "What? Haven't they been running a cartoon of that already?" So, Seth Rogen's doing Teenage
they
Mutant
have.
Ninja Turtles. I don't know why.
Well, there's just been so many iterations of the Turtles over the years, because obviously there was the original cartoon, and then there was the original live-action movies, and then there was that weird animated movie that came out in like 2007, just called TMNT, that I saw in theaters, and it was a very weird movie. I have no idea who made it, where it came from. Nothing ever happened with that project ever again. It was just that one movie. Then there's the Nickelodeon TV show, and there's the Michael Bay movies. Like, there's just been so many iterations of these characters that they lend themselves to different takes on them. But I just hope that it's not just another run-of-the-mill Turtles reboot, because I really love the Turtles. I had all the action figures growing up. I watched all the movies. Wasn't the biggest fan of the TV shows, but I was a huge fan of the live-action movies and the action figures. And I enjoyed them. And I was really disappointed with what Michael Bay did with them, but it's okay. Either or, I'm interested to see what Seth Rogen does, because he's the last person I would ever expect to want to helm a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles project. It's weird. It's weird.
Yeah. I have nothing much else to say.
Yeah.
Our last bit of news that I have for us today is apparently a statement was made by both Sony and Marvel that there are plans to connect the Sony Spider-Verse with the MCU, and more details will be released after the releasing of No Way Home.
Which is not till Christmas, so...
Yes. So, for all of you who said that we're getting all the Spider-Men together, you're probably right. We're probably right. With that kind of press statement, you can't just say, by the way, we're going to connect these two, but we're not going to have the Spider-Man in it. Yeah, we know. We know now. It's a Spider-Verse movie. We're getting the Spider-Verse in Sony and MCU. It's all but officially confirmed.
Well, I mean, it was also said, first of all, the castings that they announced, they should have known that we were going to figure this out because they announced already that like months ago, Jamie Foxx is Electro and Alfred Molina's Doc Ock, and we're just like, oh, one villain from the Raimi trilogy and then one person from the Andrew Garfield Sony trilogy. And we were like, okay, so they're probably doing something Spider-Verse related. Then Alfred Molina literally said that in like the opening scene, it's like Doc Ock. He's playing the Doc Ock from the Sam Raimi trilogy, and it's like apparently some weird thing of like linking him into all of this. And he pretty much spoiled the fact that yeah, we're doing Spider-Verse, and now Sony's trying to cover it up. But now it seems like they're embracing it, even though we've been ahead of them this entire time. I don't know how I feel about that though, because I think the Marvel universe is already too, like big enough that bringing this in too might really overstuff it. But I trust Marvel, and I somewhat trust Sony, because like Sony seems to know what they're doing at times, because they've made Spider Verse, like the cartoon Into the Spider Verse, which is fantastic, and they tried something different with Venom, and they're making another Venom movie. I did not see Venom, but apparently audiences loved it, critics hated it. So I don't know what to make of that. But at least they're trying something new, and people seem to at least be enjoying what they're doing. I hated the Andrew Garfield movies, and that's when I lost all faith in Sony. But I just hope that they don't try to just do this for the sake of making money. And I hope that they're doing this and they actually have a plan and a story in mind. Because as you're going to find out in this episode, the MCU is very near and dear to my heart. And if they mess it up with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, I'm not going to be happy. That's all I have to say.
I believe, though, our Spider-Man will stick the landing. The Spider-Verse is a phenomenal concept, and if you are going to say the MCU is already stuffed, oh boy, some of the movies we're getting are going to make it feel a lot deeper. So, I believe that the Spider-Verse feels at home. I believe our leading men can take it home. So, but yeah.
I hope so.
With our final bit of news being Marvel, let's start talking about Phase 1.
Hell yeah. Let's do it.
I will
officially titled Avengers Assembled, by the way. That's the official title of Phase Marvel Studios Phase 1 Avengers Assembled. That's the actual name of it, if you're wondering.
I will give a little bit of background history that I don't even know if you know this, Matt. But I did a little bit of homework on like why they started making Phase 1, why they started making the Marvel movies. So, back in the 90s, the comics industry crashed. DC and Marvel hopelessly lost a lot of money because no one was reading comics anymore for some reason. Everyone was just watching cartoons and moving on. We had video games. No one wanted to read a comic book. And in an effort to try and keep themselves alive, Marvel decided to sell off the rights to many of its more famous characters from the 90s to movie studios that said, hey, maybe we can do something pretty cool with this. And that is why we got Sony's Spider-Man. That is why we got the original X-Men movies. That is why we got Blade, among others, including Daredevil back in the day. And all of these were great, but here's the thing. Because they sold the rights to all these characters, Marvel didn't get much money from them. These were their big name characters making money for other people. Marvel, the comic company, got $25K just from Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man movies. Just $25K. And those budgets were 10 times that. They got hardly anything from Blade, and they only got flat upfront fees for thanks for letting us use the X-Men in the X-Men movies. So they had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So comes the early 2000s, they decide so many movies have been made with big household names of superheroes and superhero teams. It's time for us to try and risk it all. And what they did was they went to the bank and they took out a $525 million loan to form Marvel Cinematic Studios. And what was their collateral? The movie rights to any movie they created with that money and the character licenses for the characters they wanted to make those movies of. It was quite literally the first movie succeeds or they lose some of the now most famous Marvel superheroes to the bank, to the public domain. That was it. It was, we're making a good movie, or Marvel will have officially killed itself off. And what did they do with that money?
Yeah.
Iron Man.
Yep. So another point of clarity that was very interesting. Thank you for sharing that because maybe people didn't know that. But yeah, so now they sold away Spider-Man, X-Men, Fantastic Four, notably. Though it was mostly those three, Blade as well. And now
Daredevil.
because the MCU is so successful, because the
I like
MCU
Daredevil.
is so successful, it's now been them trying to get them all back, and other studios being like, "Well, you're Marvel, so if you're gonna pay us, you're gonna pay us a lot of money because we know you have it." So they're selling high. But yeah, no, they pretty a lot of people forget when Iron Man, and I guess we'll start talking about it in 2008 when Iron Man was announced. He was still very much a B tier Marvel superhero. He wasn't one of the big guns. The big guns were the ones they already sold away. It was already Spider-Man, X-Men, which included Wolverine, obviously, Fantastic Four with Human Torch and the Thing. Those were the guys that they marketed their stuff off of. It was those, and they couldn't make movies with them. So Iron Man was not a very popular character. Obviously, comic book fans knew who he was, but he wasn't the household name that we know of today. It's not like Tony Stark was the face of superhero films and this almost instant moneymaker. It was very much an unknown. So not only were they taking a risk with the money they were loading, but also the character they were starting with. They could have easily started with the Hulk, or they could have started with Captain America, who are more popular at the time. Instead, they chose Iron Man, which was very risky. And another risky thing about Iron Man was the casting choice of Robert Downey Jr., who before Iron Man was still getting into a bit of trouble. He spent some time in prison. He had some alcohol and drug problems. He had kind of fallen from grace. He was very, very popular in the late 90s, early 2000s, and he had a bit of a rough patch. They cast him as Iron Man, and like I guess it's safe to say that the rest is history because it kind of worked out for them. I'd say, Sean, kind of worked out.
Yeah. Also, according to a public survey poll done by Marvel, prior to the release of Iron Man, the majority of the public, when asked who they thought Iron Man was, the majority of the public thought Iron Man was a robot, not a superhero in a costume. They thought he was a robot created in a superhero comic book. So it's very funny to now see everybody knows Iron Man. Everyone knows the iconic lines. Everyone knows the movies. People just didn't know who he was before 2008. And then what a beginning. They could not have had a more massive success. It was a brilliant movie start to finish. There are hardly any problems with it. It was a refreshing take on the superhero genre, which had gotten stale, because we had gotten used to seeing the style of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. We had gotten used to seeing the X-Men movies. We had gotten used to seeing Blade and Daredevil and grittier things like Watchmen. We saw all of these like kind of darker, a little bit high stakes superhero film franchises. And it was a far cry, even that was a far cry from the old days where it was just people in literal spandex. I'm pretty sure someone who listens to us can probably remember images of spandex Superman and spandex Adam West as Batman. This was just a next step, and Iron Man in 2008 was the next evolution in that. The cinematic superhero. And the thing that absolutely guaranteed its success, the slam dunk at the end of the movie, was the secret stinger, the secret end card special of, I want to talk to you about the Avengers initiative. Oh my god, every comic fan that went to go see this movie instantaneously knew what they were going to do. Everyone who had never read a comic book before thought, what's the Avengers Assembly? Like, what, or the initiative, what's that? And then they started talking to comic book fans, they got them hype, and then they paved the road to the Avengers.
Yeah, and I remember I lost my mind because personally, I've always been a huge Marvel fan over DC. I said this repeatedly in the DCEU episode. I'm very much so Marvel over DC. So I knew Iron Man before going into this movie, and I never forget when my brother showed me the trailer, the first trailer for Iron Man. He told me, hey, a new movie's coming out. I found this cool trailer. He didn't tell me what it was about. and I see this trailer and I see Tony Stark. They keep referring to him as Tony Stark. I'm like, oh my god, are they making Iron Man? And I was losing my mind. And then I'm watching this movie and I'm loving it. And then that end credit scene happened, and my mind was blown. I was like, oh my god, they're getting, because the Hulk movie had already been announced. And I was like, okay, so they're gonna have him team up with Hulk. Who else are they gonna? I started. It was one of those times we were forming theories because we had never seen this before. We had never seen superheroes team up. This is well before Batman v Superman. The only like superhero team we ever had was the X-Men, but that's a franchise. It's not you're crossing over from different things and you're combining them. The X-Men are their own thing. If they had combined in a Fantastic Four, that's another thing. But the fact that there's multiple characters in the X-Men, that's not the same as the Avengers. The Avengers is taking multiple different solo properties of their own film franchises and crossing them over similarly to what like a TV show would do. So it was insane. But before we move on past Iron Man, because I know we already talked about the end credits, I really do want to talk about how good Robert Downey Jr. is in this movie. Oh,
absolutely.
Because he is at this point irreplaceable. I am willing to argue that in terms of superheroes, because obviously there are great supervillain performances, i.e. like a Heath Ledger, but in terms of superhero performances, I don't think that there is an actor as synonymous with the character that he plays as Robert Downey Jr. is with Tony Stark. The only other one I think you could even argue would be Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, but I think Robert Downey Jr. takes the cake. He is so good in this role. It almost feels effortless to him. And what made Robert Downey Jr. so good is if you watch Iron Man, pardon my French, Tony Stark is kind of an asshole in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
He's not a very likable dude when you first meet him. So the fact that he plays a guy that is constantly telling everybody off, and he's not being nice to his coworkers, he's not being nice to Pepper or Rhodey, and he's kind of being very selfish, and it's able to make him very endearing. It's so good, and it's a masterclass of how to play a character like this. I thought he was just fantastic, and the rest of the cast too is also really good. I mean, Gwyneth Paltrow is great as Pepper Potts, Jeff Bridges as the villain, Obadiah Stane, fantastic. The casting in this movie is great, and Jon Favreau did a great job directing it. I really, really love this movie. I know that this is one of my mom's favorite, just because she absolutely adores Robert Downey Jr. It's like she's obsessed with Tony Stark. It's crazy. But yeah, this movie is just so good, man. It's so good.
Yep. And it also, the final thing that Iron Man did was it was the birth of the first ever cinematic universe. We had seen, like, obviously movie series before, but it's very easy to say that even the Iron Man films, which stretch over 2 phases, are not the Iron Man trilogy. They're just the Iron Man movies that fit into the greater universe. It was the first time we'd ever seen such a filmmaking project attempted, and it's now the single greatest universe that has ever been done in film.
Oh, easily. It's not even a question. And the movie's it's just really fun. And we were saying how, a lot of these movies that prior we were getting sick of them because superhero movies now were either really, really campy and really over the top comic book like the Fantastic Four movies or the old Joel Schumacher Batman ones with George Clooney and that god awful, or it was either really, really serious and dark and gritty, like Blade, the X-Men movies, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. The only thing kind of in the middle was the Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire. It was a little bit of both, but even those people got sick of because Spider-Man 3 was not that good. Iron Man really is the perfect balance between being a serious superhero movie that takes its characters seriously and tries to tell a great story, while also being super funny, super fun, having great comedic lines for the characters, and kind of being a little bit over the top and campy. I mean, it's a guy in a mechanical suit that can fly, and he builds it in a cave. Even they joke about it in the film. Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a bunch of scraps. It's insane, and I really do. I just love this movie. This is one of the ones I could rewatch over and over again and never get sick of. I really could, and I really enjoy seeing RDJ in his first role just killing it. He's so good.
Absolutely. But
2008.
with such a smashing success, the second child in this first phase kind of fell short. A greater,
Yeah.
I feel like when the Incredible Hulk hit theaters, and it did half as great a job as Iron Man, I feel like there was some tension in the writers' room. I feel like there was definitely some stress. Because keep in mind, Marvel still had that loan. They were still using that dreaded loan to pay for these movies. And if any movie in the six was cause for alarm, it was the Hulk. Talk to anybody who is a diehard Marvel fan, even the most religious Marvel fans you can find, who know every scrap of every single movie, and none of them can really describe the Hulk to you accurately. I can't.
Yep.
No one can. Everyone just kind of skipped this one.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
And the only thing that kind of saved
I mean,
the only thing that kind of saved it was the very end, like the end title card, to try and compete with the Avengers Initiative title card that came before end title card that came before it. Tony Stark makes an uncredited appearance, arriving at the bar where he finds General Ross and suggests putting a team together. And he's doing the same thing Nick Fury did to him. And that's what saved this movie. But that only made the second wave of moviegoers see it. No one, the diehards that went to see it in theaters, the diehards who saw it first, had to tell the second wave, which was slightly bigger, to go see this. But other than that, there's nothing I would say special about the Hulk. It's okay, it does its job, but it almost feels unnecessary.
yeah, and I agree with that. It is the least. If you were to skip this movie completely, you would not be missing a single thing. Because as we'll talk about in the Avengers in 2012, first of all, the Hulk's played by a different actor in that movie, so it's not even like Edward Norton comes back. And they kind of go over a lot of the Hulk's backstory in that movie to make you care about him. So really, you don't have to watch this movie at all. And it's not like any of the characters in the movie ever come back. The only one that ever does is General Ross, and he's like there sparingly. He's in like Civil War for like a couple of scenes. He shows up in Infinity War very briefly. Like, it's just, this movie has really no lasting legacy on everything that came after it. I think Edward Norton's okay as Bruce Banner. I think he does an alright job, but I never saw him as being this tortured scientist. I just saw him as Edward Norton being Edward Norton. Mark Ruffalo I thought was a much better fit, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But I totally agree. This is the one you could skip. I really do. And even though there are some redeeming elements, I do think the final fight in Harlem with Abomination and the Hulk is really cool. I think it's really fun. But the rest of the movie leading up to that, when he's in like Brazil and he's like working in this factory, and then he breaks out, and then his whole love story with Betty, with General Ross's daughter Betty, and it's just like I don't feel attached to this character. I will say this though, it's much better than the 2003 Hulk movie with Eric Bana. It's leaps and bounds better than that garbage, which I even seen all the way through because I can't turning it off. My dad swears by that movie being one of the worst things he's ever seen in his life, and my brother can also attest to that too. But I've never actually sat through the whole thing because it's just too painful. I don't like it. I just like I literally don't even have the willpower to watch this thing. This movie I can watch. This is a really watchable movie, but that's really all it is.
Yep.
There's nothing else there.
Yep. And that's all we can really say about Hulk. It does nothing for the rest of the universe. It just is there. The only thing that actually I would even argue it contributes, besides like the creation of the Hulk, is it's the first time we see super soldier serum, which that's 50%. That's 50% of Abomination's genetic makeup is super soldier serum, which is a very nice, like, for the people who were paying attention in the theaters, is a very nice way of saying, huh, super soldier serum. I wonder if Captain America is on the horizon. That's all it did. That's all it did. And now if you go back, it's useless. So there's that. But moving on after that,
Yeah.
a film that tripled its the previous's box office earnings with 623.9 million at the box office was Iron Man 2. And with Iron Man 2, any and all erasure of doubt in losing Marvel's identity. This was the perfect, like, stick the landing kind of film to cement the fact that Marvel is here to stay.
Really? You think that?
I think that after the Hulk, I think that after the massive success
Oh.
that Iron Man, like Iron Man was phenomenal. It everyone saw this movie, and then after the Hulk came out, people were scared. Especially Marvel was scared. But when they said we're gonna go ahead with Iron Man 2 already, and it did just as good as the first, they knew that okay, we just had one bad film. We're here to stay. Everything's fine. We can go forward as planned. And it is phenomenal. I like Iron Man 2. A lot of people say that Iron Man 2 is a weaker one. I like Iron Man 2. I will even say that Iron Man 2 has a soft spot in my heart because Iron Man 2 is the first Avengers movie I ever watched. It was the first one I was ever exposed to. I had a friend spend the night in like middle school, and I think I saw it a couple years after. I saw it before Avengers came out. I think I saw it shortly after Captain America came out. So like, because I knew the Avengers movie was being put together, but I had not watched any of the previous films. And a buddy had brought it over on a DVD, and we watched it together, like hanging out all night. And I was like, this is pretty cool. I didn't see the first one, but I should go back and watch that. And that was how I got into the Marvel films. Because up until that point, I was a very like stubborn DC kid. I never had read Marvel prior to seeing Iron Man 2. I knew who the characters were because I read a lot, but I was not like dying for Marvel content. I was a huge Justice League kid. So upon seeing the interest of this movie and seeing how neat it was in comparison, I started learning. And now both DC and Marvel kind of balance themselves for me. I love DC's written material and animated material, but the Marvel movies are fantastic. And Iron Man 2 was that kickoff for me.
Interesting. I did not know that. Yeah. I guess I should preface this by saying I've seen every single MCU movie in theaters. Haven't missed a single one. So this was, again, the third movie I've seen because I saw Iron Man and Hulk, which, by the way, came out the same year, 2008. And then they took 2009 off. They did not release a movie. And then in 2010, they came back with Iron Man 2. Here's what I think about Iron Man 2, though. I do think it is... I enjoy the movie, although I do think it is a step down from the first one on a couple different levels. First of all, I think it's trying to be too much. I think it is trying to be an Iron Man sequel while also trying to balance way too many subplots. You have the whole Whiplash subplot, you have the whole Justin Hammer with the weapons subplot, you have Tony and Pepper's relationship subplot, you have Tony and his dad and like this new like element that can help save his life because he's like dying because the arc reactor is like failing or something. You have so much going on in this movie that it's trying to do too much, and it's trying to set up the Avengers. It's trying to set up Nick Fury, it's trying to set up Black Widow. I just think there's too much in this movie going on. It doesn't have a clear story like the first one did. Now, I understand why they made this movie, because you have to set up the Avengers by introducing these characters, because you don't want the Avengers to have to do all of this legwork. You kind of want the Avengers to just be the Avengers and have it just start and have everything already laid down for you. So I understand why they chose to do it this way, but I do think it is a step down. However, this movie did make a great improvement on the first Iron Man, and I don't know the exact reason why. I think it's just because he didn't want to. But they recast Rhodey in this movie. It was Terrence Howard in the first Iron Man, and they recast him with Don Cheadle, who has played that role ever since. And I think Don Cheadle is 10 times better than Terrence Howard. I thought Terrence Howard was okay in the first Iron Man. Rhodey didn't have that much to do, but I think Don Cheadle is just so much better in this role, and especially knowing where that character ends up and how Don Cheadle has played that character over the years, I think that it's really, really cool seeing him in this role for the first time. I really do like Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer. I think he's a fun villain. He's very charismatic. He's almost like the anti Tony Stark in terms of this. He's still very cocky and arrogant, but he's just so mindless, and he's just like, yeah, I can do all this, no problem. And he's like not actually smart at all. I think it's actually really cool seeing like a complete foil to Tony. I do enjoy this movie though. I find enjoyment in it, but again, I think the first Iron Man still absolutely takes the cake for me in terms of just being a better film. But I still enjoyed it when I saw it. I think it's a fun one. I don't hate any of the Marvel movies. I just think some of them are worse than others. There are only like one or two that I actively find like massive problems with. One of them being the Hulk, that I think are just not great. But I don't think they're bad movies. They're all watchable and they're all able to be having fun with. And I think Iron Man 2 actually doesn't deserve all the hate it gets. People say this is a movie that's, everything wrong with comic book movies. It's too worried about setting up a universe than being an actual good movie. No, I think there's stuff here that makes it a good movie. However, I do agree that it's trying to set up other stuff. But,
it definitely is doing...
Take it with you, Will. I enjoy it.
It's definitely doing a lot to set up other stuff. There's a lot of, stuff that lays the groundwork for future arcs and subplots, the introduction of Black Widow, like you said, and also the very end. Once again, that ending scene where Fury meets with Stark again, saying, by the way, I kind of lied. I don't think you're good for the Avengers, but S.H.I.E.L.D. would like you as a consultant, and he name drops S.H.I.E.L.D., and that's a big, oh my god, that's another setup thing. And also the very end saying, seeing Agent Coulson, giving the, oh, we found it phone call, and we see just the hammer in the crater, and everyone loses their minds, because everyone who read a comic is like, Thor's coming. We're gonna see Thor.
I know. That was great. That was great.
That was such
that might have been to this day, I think that's still the post-credit scene. Outside of the first one with Nick Fury approaching Stark, I think that's the post-credit scene that made me flip out in the theater the most. Because now Marvel post-credit scenes in Phase 2 or 3 are either funny jokes, they're funny little extra deleted scenes, or they're setting up another character to come in or something like that. And yeah, they're fun, but nothing groundbreaking. This was awesome because there's oh my god, okay, we have Iron Man, we have Hulk, who's next? And then you see the hammer. I totally agree. That was so cool. Oh my god, that was great.
Yes. Phenomenal. And
Iron Man 2.
And of course, like very few of the end cards, it directly called the next movie, because on the horizon was Thor. Immediately we took a shift. We're not in Earth, we're in Asgard. We're seeing Thor. And of course we're back on Earth during the events of Thor. But all of a sudden, just boom, a whole realm of gods, magic, Thor losing his memories and all of that plot. It was fantastic. Thor was one that I'll admit I did not see until right before seeing Avengers, which I did not see Avengers in theaters. But Thor was one of the last ones on that list of when I was just getting into Marvel, and I've seen it a few times since then. But it is such a fantastic start for a character. A lot of people don't like the Thor movie, but I think it deserves more love. I think that not a lot of people appreciate what the Thor movies tried to do. They were the most ambitious. They were the most gutsy, because they just took everything and was all right, Earth, no. Yes, but also no. They had to take the whole mythos of the Frost Giants and Asgard, LeFay, Jotunheim. Everything was there to prep us for it's the Marvel Universe, not Earth's mightiest heroes. And they did the best they could, and it was. And I don't understand. I still don't get why people don't like this film. It's got a lot going on, and the romance is not exactly believable at times, and Thor definitely does some weird shit. But it's also endearing, because he's just a big, dumb golden retriever the entire movie, and it's great.
Yeah, I think my favorite parts of the movie are whenever they're in Asgard, personally. I love the first half hour of this movie where they go to Jotunheim and they try to fight the Frost Giants, and Thor is overconfident, and then he gets punished by his father. and you see that whole dynamic, and then him and Loki's whole dynamic in the very beginning when Loki was still baby Loki. No one liked him yet, especially the audience. He wasn't the big bad that we all know, and he wasn't the major character that's now getting his own TV show. He was just Loki. It's really, really fun going back and watching that at its beginning stages. I love the first like 25, 30 minutes of this movie. I think it is so cool. And Kenneth Branagh was a great choice to direct this movie because he is so in Shakespearean stuff. He directed himself in Hamlet, Henry V, all that stuff. So he really brought that royalty and like regalness feel to the Thor movie. And the beginning of what I don't like the Thor movie is that they think we'll only like Thor if with human friends. And I didn't like that. I thought that Thor being Asgard the whole movie and having an adventure up there would have been much more entertaining than literally bringing him down to Earth, quite literally, and giving him human friends like Darcy and Selvig and Jane. And they really have not embraced Thor's obscurity until Ragnarok, because even in Thor the Dark World, they had him come right back down to Earth again and do stuff here. I don't find it bad. It's just I find that the movie halts as soon as he goes down to Earth. I think it becomes not as good of a movie anymore. But then the ending I think is great. When he destroys the bridge to the Bifrost, cutting off his only way of getting back, and Loki falls into that abyss and everything. And I love the ending of this movie. I think it's really, really cool. But it's like that middle second act where they're on Earth doing things with everybody. I just don't. There are some scenes I like though on Earth, but the overall feel of that sequence, like that 30 minutes, it's all right. I love the scene where he's in the diner and he throws the cup on the ground and he goes, "This drink, I like it. Another," and he smashes it on the ground. Cracks me up every time. And I also like the scene where he breaks into the shield. Yeah, I like the scene where he breaks into the shield base to get his hammer back, and you see Hawkeye for the first time. I thought that's a really cool action sequence when he breaks in everywhere and he, just starts mowing down people. Yeah, there's some good elements to that sequence where he's on Earth, the whole second act. But for the most part, it's not as good as the beginning or the end of the movie. I think the beginning and the end are the strong parts.
Yeah, I will agree with you. But Thor, while not exactly the greatest success out of the first phase, but definitely better than Hulk, was an endearing addition. It was the Labrador. Yeah. It was the golden retriever of the group. This is just a big dumb idiot, and we love him.
Yeah, and Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston, who are both great in the movie, very much unknowns before this movie began. They were not these big name actors that they are now. And I got to give Marvel again props for casting, because they killed it again. I think Chris Hemsworth is perfect as Thor, and I think Tom Hiddleston is even more perfect as Loki. I think I can't even imagine anyone else playing that character, similarly to how I can't imagine anyone else playing Tony. I think Tom Hiddleston is that good in this role. He's so perfect, but he's not quite. It's really a testament to him, because he's good in this movie, but I think he's even better in the Avengers, which we'll get to.
Yes.
But
before we get to the Avengers,
he's damn good.
Before we get to the Avengers, we have one last stop. Captain America. Also a very ambitious start, because you could have done a lot with Captain America. Because by now, if you're listening to this, you know the story. The soldier out of time. Chosen for his bravery, not for his brawn, and made into a super soldier. And had to prove himself on the battlefields of World War II, stopping basically the Nazis, but supervillain Nazis. And in doing so, falls into the ice and awakens 70 years later into modern day times. Now here's the thing. A lot of Avengers style continuities have seen this was just like the opening act of a comic, or this was the opening act of a movie, or it was a flashback you saw in a Captain America movie. I remember I saw a couple of the animated films as a kid, and Captain America was already in modern day, and you just saw a 10-minute flashback sequence of him falling into the ice. This movie decided we're gonna just go put all of our chips on the background. And they did the whole movie in the 40s. They did the whole thing out of time. They did it as a period piece. It was amazing because you wouldn't think it would have worked so well, and it did. Everything felt believable. Every little detail that they gave out. You saw the beginnings of so many great ideas. Hydra's introduction. Also Hydra. Yeah, Hydra's introduction also kind of was noticeable in the more modern day events of the other Marvel movies. With Shield being its own thing, you were able to go back and watch the Shield scenes where it was mentioned and think, oh, Hydra paves the way for that. They're probably still working within it. And then you get that confirmation later. You see the Tesseract. You see Tesseract-powered weaponry.
Yeah.
And you see all of these fantastic things. Like, you see him getting help from Howard Stark. You get the shield from Howard Stark. Vibranium gets introduced, which we didn't get Wakanda for a long time, but where did they get the Vibranium? There's so much that was
Absolutely.
so cleverly slipped in that when you go back and watch it after all this time, you can see the entire universe being born. Tony Stark and Iron Man may have said, alright, this is the Big Bang. This is where we're getting everything from. This is the source, the epicenter, the first impact. But it was this movie that actually said we can make a universe. It wasn't just different corners of the globe like with Iron Man and Hulk. It wasn't, oh, there's now Earth and Asgard, as with Iron Man and Hulk and Thor. It was now, you see how all of these different corners are going to come together. And you can see where people are going to go. It's such an interesting beginning. And also, I will say this, I geek out about this every single time. The end card, where you see him in modern day New York, freaking out. You feel like you've been punched in the gut. You feel like you've been ripped out of time with him. But it's also interesting because if you go back and watch every single movie in this universe, it's one of the few that ends in silence. There's no music. There's just the ambient noise of the background. I think that's fitting. And because when you watch other movies, you always get the heroic swell or the symphony or the main lick, the leitmotif, always plays during the final end. This one doesn't. It was the first one to not. It felt like, because when you even when you watched Hulk, if you watch Iron Man, you watch Hulk, you watch Iron Man 2, you watch Thor, they felt like victories, or they felt like big setups. They felt epic. You were cheering when you watched them. This one you didn't cheer. You didn't feel like you won. You lost. Mm-hmm. He loses in this movie. Captain America's first debut is losing. And it's silent, and it hits home. And then you see him all the way in the future with, like, granted, we're not in phase 3 yet, but what's his last moment you see on screen? It's not silence, but it's 1940s records. It's the full circle.
Mm-hmm.
The music that should have been playing.
It's so good. I love... This movie is another one that some people give hate to for some reason, and I honestly do not know why. I really don't. I think this is probably my favorite, one of my favorite standalone Marvel films. I really do. I think it's fantastic. I love all the characters. Peggy Carter is so good in this movie. Tommy Lee Jones is hysterical. He has so many lines that just make me crack up laughing every single time. And Steve Rogers' arc in this movie is so good because he starts the movie literally just wanting to serve his country and give his, and if necessary, give his life. It literally the first line he ever speaks in the Marvel guy telling him, "Oh, all these people are dying over by the war. Makes you think twice about enlisting, right?" And Steve Rogers just stands up and goes, "Nope," and he walks over and he walks away from him, and it's just like, oh, this guy's serious. And then he has the whole scene where he lays on the grenade and he's like, "Get back!" And he's like, he literally thinks he's killing himself to save everybody in a practice drill. And he goes, "Wait, that was a test?" Like, you just see this guy wants to just do everything he can to serve others, and it ends with him doing the ultimate sacrifice, giving up his life to save pretty much all of America from this insane nuclear attack by putting this ship and himself into the ice. It's really, really poetic. And I also love the feel of this movie. Joe Johnston directed this movie, and I love how he's able to capture the grittiness of the war. It really makes you feel like you're in the 1940s. And I love the score. Alan Silvestri. This was the first Marvel movie that he scored, and then he obviously went on to score the Avengers movies. He was great as the composer for this movie. Chris Evans, I think, is great, and this was another casting choice that got a lot of people turning their head and doing a double take because he was literally just the Human Torch in Fantastic Four, and now he's Captain America. And everyone's like, what the hell? This is not Captain America. And he killed it, in my opinion. I thought Chris Evans was great in this movie. I really enjoyed this movie. I think Red Skull's a great villain. I think the Hydra tie-ins are great. It's the first time we see an Infinity Stone, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
We saw the
first time we see
Tesseract.
the Space Stone.
Well, we saw the Tesseract in Thor, right? No.
Okay,
Well,
that's true.
we saw the Tesseract first. We
I
just
think- I
didn't
think
know it was an Infinity Stone.
Yeah, this was the first time that knowingly we were seeing something that we're like, okay, that's something. That's something else that we haven't seen before, and it was one of those moments that really caught our eye. And again, it comes into play later. And again, I want to also, I know you just talked about it for a while, but I really want to mention that last like 5 minutes because it is probably top 10, maybe even like top 5 Marvel scenes of all time for me because I think it is so ambitious in the fact that that's how they ended this huge movie. And I personally so another thing I want to mention is that these movies are not released in chronological order. If you were to watch the MCU in chronological order, this would technically be the first movie you watch. I do not like watching these movies in chronological order because I think that this movie was the perfect movie to precede the Avengers in the sense that how it ends with Cap entering modern times and being so disoriented and Nick Fury being like, you've been asleep, Cap, for almost 70 years. And I love nothing more than watching this movie, seeing that ending, and then immediately throwing on the Avengers. I love that feeling. I think it's great. I think that's the way I always watch it. Even though technically this is the first movie you're supposed to watch in the chronological order. And that last line crushes me to this day. And it's what makes the ending of Endgame so good because you see the pain because Nick Fury's like, is something wrong, Cap? Like he's just, and Steve just goes, yeah, it's just I had a date. And it just cuts to black, and I'm just like, oh god,
It hurts.
that's a gut punch. And then the credits start rolling. It is just so powerful. And the post-credit scene for this movie is the only Marvel movie to not really have a post-credit scene because the post-credit scene is the first trailer for the Avengers. So it's not even like a post-credit scene. It's just like another trailer at the end. But yeah, I think that this movie is really, really, really good. God, this is the movie I don't watch enough. There are a lot of these Marvel movies that I watch a lot, like the first Iron Man movie or the Avengers, which we're about to talk about. This is one of those movies I wish I watched more because it's so good. I love this movie. I really, really do.
Agreed. And with that trailer end card, with that fade to black, what did we get a year later? The Avengers.
Ugh,
It all comes together.
Let's go.
The band's all here. We had Marvel's The Avengers. And it was worth the payoff. We had our successful
God, it was
solo
perfect.
films up to this point. We had fantastic amounts of success. I think what was the I think Iron Man was the highest grossing of all of them. I think it had the most box office.
I will check.
I believe because I know Iron Man's box office was somewhere around 650 million. And the Avengers you go ahead and check me. But the Avengers, the success showed, and they had no fear about their loan.
I have the numbers right here. So obviously the Avengers beat everybody. But in terms of United States dollars, Iron Man is second. But if you count worldwide, Iron Man 2 actually did gross more than Iron Man. And so they're 2 and 3 in both cases. But if you're just counting US, it's the first one, and if it's worldwide, meaning all other territories, Iron Man 2 has more. So they were 2 and 3. It's just a matter of what you're counting.
Yes, and Iron Man 1 and 2 did their job. They cemented this the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Marvel's here to stay. But the Avengers was the final note in the grand symphony that ensured Marvel's success. It racked in 1.519 billion in box office, and it deserved every penny. We had every single scrap of film that they were able to put into these movies come together in a fantastic final act to the first phase. It not only gave us everything we wanted, it not only tied in all the films, but it also showed us what could be done moving forward. There was no way they were stopping after this. There was no way.
No.
And what did
Absolutely not.
and what did we get at the end of this wonderful film that showed the culmination of all these characters coming together? We also got the hint of what was to come so many years later, because while the other met with his master, we saw Thanos for the first time. We saw the Purple Tyrant himself turn to the camera, and everyone in the theaters who were comic book nerds loyal instantly felt fear. They knew the story that they had to build to now. They gave the people who knew what they were doing the expectation that would become Infinity War a decade later. It was the most ambitious way to end this film, and it was the most ambitious film of the bunch. Every film, except for probably the Hulk, got more and more and more ambitious. And the Avengers was a perfect end note. We saw the Battle of New York. We saw the team getting put together. We saw the corruption at S.H.I.E.L.D. We saw the return of Loki, who we then fell in love with. We got a new Bruce Banner, and we got a lot of mystery and magic surrounding the Tesseract, confirming that it was much more important than it originally let on.
Absolutely. Yep. So people forget, similarly to how Marvel had a lot riding on Iron Man when they first made it, obviously, I think it's a fair argument to say Marvel had even more riding on this movie, because they had made these previous 5 movies to build to this one. And if this one was a flop, they would have to completely either stop or start over, or both. It was really, this movie was going to be the deciding factor. It was the verdict on what was Marvel going to do going forward. Was this movie going to flop, and were they going to have to then scramble to figure out what to do next? Or was it going to be a success? This was a complete unknown, and Marvel was going into this project probably very scared. But based on the script, I kind of doubt that, because this script is so good. And a part that I like about the Avengers is that it's not expect. There's really not that many big action set pieces. Yes, there's the helicarrier being blown up and Loki escaping and unleashing the Hulk. But other than that, it's a lot of maybe like little mini action sequences. Like you have Iron Man, Cap, and Thor in the forest. But that's a little quick battle. It's not really like a huge action set piece. A lot of this movie are these characters meeting, talking, and clashing with each other, because Tony and Cap specifically do not like each other in this movie at all. And I loved that. I thought their character dynamic was set up perfectly in this movie. And that conversation that they had, that off, what are you? And then Tony goes, I'm a genius billionaire playboy. It's obviously like an iconic line at this point. And then Steve's like, you're not the guy to make a sacrifice play. All you do is care about yourself. And then Tony's like, all you do, there's nothing special about you. Everything special about you came out of a bottle. And it's just like, you're seeing these characters meet, but it's not how you would expect. Because going into this movie, you expected these characters to meet, they'd get along, they'd fight the big bad, they'd win, and they'd go home. This movie challenges its characters a lot. And Black Widow has a lot to do in this movie. Hawkeye is a bit underused because he's turned bad. He was mind tricked by the Mind Stone, Loki's scepter. So he's bad for the first hour of this movie. Thor has a lot to do, and easily, and I mean easily, it's not even close. The best character in this movie is Bruce Banner. Oh my God, Mark Ruffalo's so good in this movie.
If you want to actually watch a good Hulk
he has
film,
all the best
go watch
moments.
this one.
He literally has all the best moments in this movie. He has when he punches Thor. He has the scene where he tosses around Loki and he says, "Puny God." You know, that scene. He has the best line in the MCU, not including anything from Endgame. The "I'm always angry" line when he turns to Cap and he smashes the big Chitauri monster. And then the big shot, the circle shot, that's so iconic, and the music swells. That is still, in my mind, the best moment in the MCU when you first see these heroes team up. When that line by Bruce Banner, oh, this is the Hulk. Forget the Ed Norton movie, man. This is the Hulk that we all have been waiting for.
We didn't... This confirmed... Like, Mark Ruffalo kicked the door down and said, "I'm going to give you the Hulk you wanted." And here he is to stay. He's one of the most fascinating characters to watch grow from this moment on. He does a beautiful job portraying the tortured scientist. He does a beautiful job showing off how smart Bruce Banner is and how tortured the Hulk is. Because that's the thing that everyone forgets, is that it's not just the Hulk. It's Bruce Banner. Bruce Banner has to control the Hulk. Bruce Banner is the hero here. The Hulk is a manifestation of his frustration and anger. It takes skill to rein that in, especially when it physically can come out of you and take on such a form as the Hulk. The Hulk is such a powerhouse, too. Like, for any nerds out there who read comics like I have, who I've studied comic books for years now, the Hulk is arguably one of the most powerful characters in the MCU. Not... Of course, like, he's not gotten there yet, but he has that ability to. In theory, the Hulk's power doesn't have a cap to it. The angrier he gets, the stronger he becomes. And that's why when you see him lose his mind even further in other films, that's why he's even much more of a threat. It's not like he's been training or anything. It's how angry Bruce Banner is. If you read the comics, Hulk gains enough power at certain points in those comic continuities to lift up continents from the Earth's crust and move them around. That's how ridiculously strong this creature is. And to rein that in as a mortal man, because keep in mind, he's one of the few mortal men on any superhero team you see in the MCU, that shows how much of a hero, how powerful, how important Bruce is to the Hulk. And you get that Bruce here.
I want to quickly mention a couple of scenes, because this is the movie that defines Phase 1, obviously. I think it's safe to say. I want to quickly talk on about two scenes that I love. The first one is the scene with Black Widow and Loki, when Loki is in the chamber and Black Widow is interrogating him. I think that scene is insanely good. I love, first of all, Black Widow in this movie. Going into it, I had no idea how she was going to, in any sense of the word, fit in with this. You're talking about Tony Stark, Captain America, literally the God of Thunder, Thor, and the Hulk, and yet Black Widow, who's this like assassin, is supposed to keep up with them. It didn't feel like they could ever pull it off, and they did. Black Widow's great in this movie, and this scene in particular really is the first hint of her tortured past, because she talks about the red in her ledger, how she wants to get it out, and how she wants to do right, and her conversation back and forth with Loki, and how he is manipulating her, while also she's manipulating him into telling her his plan, and she's able to deduce that he wants to unleash the Hulk. I love that scene so much. And then immediately following that scene is the scene I was talking about where Cap and Tony argue, but that's just one little moment of this entire sequence where they're all in the helicarrier room around the scepter and everything, and it's this long tracking shot of all of them arguing, and then it does this shot where it pans back to Loki's scepter and the camera inverts, and all it shows is the Mind Stone and all of these characters arguing. One of my favorite shots in the film, because it just is showing that Even though Loki's not in the room, he is absolutely in the room because he is toying with every single member of this team, and he knows exactly how to get under their skin. And Loki's such a good villain in this movie, dude.
Yes.
Like, oh my goodness, he up until Thanos, he was the gold standard of Marvel villains in the MCU. Because that's another thing the MCU doesn't really have a lot of is great villains. Their villains always are sometimes kind of lacking because of the overabundance of heroes. But Loki in this movie steals the entire movie, in my opinion. All of his moments are great. He's funny, likable, menacing as hell. He's so scary. And his interactions with every single character and the way he manipulates them is so cool. And I think that his plan of getting captured and then breaking out by the Hulk and everything, it's just really, really clever. Yeah, I love Loki in this movie. I think he's great.
Yes. A phenomenal film. Every character has their part. Every character is fully fleshed out. Every character has the beginnings of their grand universal arcs laid out before them. Loki becomes the gold standard of the villains. Everything in this movie was perfect. Or if not perfect, damn near close. They laid out the roadmap for everyone to see. If you were fluent in comic book, you knew what we were getting in 10 years. You knew we were going to see the Infinity War. You knew we were going to see Thanos be a threat. You knew we were going to see Loki return. You knew we were going to see this team come together again. And you could only imagine the heroes they were going to bring in the future. We got a lot of curveballs in the next phase, but they felt like they belonged after seeing this movie.
Yeah, and I will say this is probably to this day, even after watching Infinity War or Endgame or even any like Dickens comes to mind as well, or even Harry Potter and Deathly Hallows Part 2, I think this is still, the first Avengers, this is still my favorite movie theater experience of my life because of how excited I was for this movie, how good the movie ended up being, and the audience I was watching it with because it was my entire family. It was my aunt and uncle and my cousin. It was a bunch of other family friends. There was a huge group of us that went to go see this movie. And it was just such an amazing crowd. I loved it. Also, I want to bring up something at the end, because this is the movie this is the pivotal moment that completely changes Tony Stark's character. And we'll get into this in Phase 2. But up until this point, in Iron Man 2, and the Avengers, he's kind of a cocky asshole. He's still in this movie. He has his flaws. He had the whole scene where he's, when did you become an expert on nuclear astrophysics? Last night. And then he has the moment where he's like, that man is playing Galaga. Like, he has like all these quippy one-liners. He's still very, snarky. But as soon as he goes through the wormhole and he throws the nuke up at the Chitauri spaceship and he willingly sacrifices himself, he does not think he's coming back. He is literally sacrificing himself, and he sees all of those alien ships, and he is able to see what is coming. He's able to see that there are more villains and enemies out there than he ever thought, and now he has this burden on him to protect the world. It is what triggers his PTSD in Iron Man 3. It is what triggers his visions and his paranoia and guilt in Age of Ultron and later on in Civil War. And if you watch the first Avengers and you watch Captain America Civil War back to back, Tony Stark is a completely different character in both those movies. And this is the moment that is the switch that flips in his head that completely changes everything. And I love that because it shows that these characters are not just one-note pieces, that they're not just action figures you can smash together. They're actual human beings, and that's why we all go back to these movies and we love them so much, is because these characters are so gonna have he was part of this huge group, and my Uncle Mike is a gigantic comic book fan. Uncle Mike, if you're watching this, hello. He collects comic books. He has so many. He's always been a huge Marvel fan. And as soon as Thanos showed up in that post-credit scene, I've never heard him yell louder than I did that in that moment. He was absolutely going insane. As soon as Thanos' head turned and you see that smile, I'll never forget. He just goes, "Oh, Thanos!" And he just gets so excited. I remember it was like, "Oh my God, it's Thanos!" Like, shout out to Uncle Mike. I still remember that moment. That was a lot of fun. And yeah, that post-credit scene, a 6-year teaser, because this movie came out in 2012 and Infinity War was until 2018. 6 years we with Thanos, and this was the beginning. Yep. But such a great post-credit scene. Such a great post-credit scene.
A brilliant end to a brilliant first run. A phase that was built out of a risk, a gamble. It's either succeed or lose Marvel forever. And they succeeded. They beat the odds. They did more than succeed. The Avengers, at the end of that film, became the American pantheon of gods, as far as I'm concerned. They became household names. Everyone began researching, everyone began reading, comics boomed, and pop culture got its booster shot. Household names were superheroes. It was amazing.
Yep, I totally agree. And again, everyone's now trying to copy it. You know, Marvel did it perfectly. Marvel was the first one to do it, and they took their time. They gave each of these characters their own movie. They really, really thought this thing out, and it shows, because I think it is a brilliant direction that they took in terms of making it, and now every movie studio is trying to copy it, including their rival DC. And there's other cinematic universes out there that always try to do this, you know, oh, we gotta make all these team up movies, but none of them actually have the balls to do the legwork and to actually plan it out. They just want to get started right away. Like, you know, DC's the perfect example. Their second movie was Batman v Superman. It's like, well, why don't we give Batman his own movie first? Why don't we give Wonder Woman her own movie first? Why don't we give Superman a second movie? Why are we rushing this? And it's failures like that show just how good Marvel is, because they were willing to wait. And good things come to those who wait. And my goodness, was Phase a good thing. The Avengers in 2012 is probably the biggest achievement in comic book movie making ever. Even more so than Infinity War and Endgame, because Infinity War and Endgame, you're just shoving more characters in. Avengers was unprecedented for its time. This was the first time you were taking 4 franchise films with 4 different leading characters: Iron Man, Cap, Hulk, Thor. You were taking those pre-existing materials and putting them into one crossover movie, and it was perfect. I struggle to find flaws in this movie. I adore it. It's so good.
Agreed. It is damn near perfect, if not perfect already. But there we have it. Our dissection, our step-by-step guide through the first phase of Marvel. And of course, we have a list for you guys. We have a ranking. We'll have some post-discussion. I will say, though, to already kind of say it, we do have guests lined up to help us along the next 2 phases. And they are wonderful friends of ours, and they will only be adding to these dissertations. But without further ado, before we kind of bring you to a close and kind of give you a sense of what the rest of the summer will look like for our second season, we have a list for you guys. We put together, I probably could wager they're really close, they're almost identical. It's not like we have a lot of combinations we could really put together. But Matt and I ranked the 6 films in the first phase from least favorite to most favorite. We're not saying these are objectively the best, but we are saying these are the ones we prefer in the order of, would we watch these again, or would we just kind of pass on them? So, Matt, do you want to do bottom three, top three?
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. So I'll since I'm already talking, I guess I'll start. By the way, I'm assuming, since you already listened to if you listen to the entire episode, you probably already guess what our lists are. But just in case you're wondering, here they are. So number 6 for me is The Incredible Hulk. It's just the most forgettable one. I already kind of touched on most of my problems with it. I wonder. One thing that always troubles me with this movie is I always go back and forth on whether or not Mark Ruffalo being in this movie would have made it better. But I'm really not sure about that because the Bruce Banner in this movie is way different than the Bruce Banner we saw in the Avengers, and I'm really not sure if it would have been tonally the right fit. But Incredible Hulk is number 6. It's not my favorite. Number 5 is actually where I have Iron Man 2, and that surprised me. But I have Iron Man 2 at number 5. Um, I just think that this movie, it was just, whereas the other movies were very much so story driven, and they had a clear beginning, middle, and end, and very strong arcs for their characters. I feel like this movie was just trying to do too much, and it kind of somewhat buckled underneath all of that weight, but it did definitely endure all of that, and it was able to still be a very enjoyable comic book film. And then number 4, I have Thor, the first Thor movie, which again I really enjoy, but there are just some parts of the movie that I think are just minor downgrades from other parts of the movie, and it's not as well paced as others. And there are times where I find myself wishing that the movie was doing something else than what it actually is. But with all that said, I really enjoy the first 30 minutes in Asgard. I enjoy the final fight. I think Thor and Loki are great in this movie. I think Anthony Hopkins as Odin is wonderful. I love all of Thor's friends on Asgard. Darcy in the first movie is kind of annoying, but I can get past her. I thought Natalie Portman was fine as Jane. I thought Dr. Selvig was pretty good. Stellan Skarsgård. But yeah, Thor's number 4. Again, a really good movie, but the other ones are better. So that's my bottom 3.
Well spoken. My number 6 is Hulk as well. I feel like we've said everything that can be said about Hulk.
Yep.
It showed up. It showed up and it did its best. But its best really wasn't great. It was good when it came out. But then we had Bruce Banner come along in Avengers and it was 10 times better, and that was actually the Hulk movie we wanted. So the Hulk is here. The Hulk, something had to go last, and it wasn't going to be anything else. So it's the Hulk. I was telling Matt before we started recording. I have seen all these movies like in the recent history, so I felt like I didn't need to rewatch each of them over the past week of recording. However, Hulk was one of the ones that I said I really need to actually watch this again. It was this and Thor that I was like I need to see these again because I've not seen them in a long time, and I forgot that I put Hulk on. I had it in one, like on a side-by-side tab on my monitor while I was doing work on a D&D campaign I'm running this summer, and I was kind of like half watching it, mostly writing, and then about 40 minutes into the movie when it was like getting towards the end, I was like, oh wait, I was supposed to pay attention to this, and it just wasn't grabbing my attention, and it just shows. It was a movie. It did its job when it came out. It doesn't hold up.
It was a movie.
It was a movie that came out. Above that, though, what differs, Matt, is I have Thor right above that. And the problem here is there's only 6 of these, so it's not like it's a mile between each film. But Thor, I've just not seen as much times. I appreciate Thor. I like Thor. I like a lot. Like I said, he's a big, dumb golden retriever, and I love him for that. But there were several other performances that outshadowed the rest of the movie. I think Thor is good in Thor. I think Natalie Portman is good in Thor. I actually liked Darcy. I think Darcy was a good counterbalance to some of the big brawny stupidity. But and of course Skarsgård was great. Hiddleston was great. Hopkins was great. It's just it felt like the baby steps. I felt like I was watching like the toddler at home movie, you know? And it was good, but it just wasn't what we got later from the Thor, like the Thor part of the franchise. That was it. It was, like I said, fantastic when it came out, still good, better than the Hulk, but just not as heavy hitting as later Thor appearances. And above that, I have Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2 is weird because like Iron Man 2 is much more a sentimental like than like, oh, this is actually good. it was my first introduction to Marvel, and it was enough to hook me. But then I watched the rest of Phase 1, and I realized it's just at the halfway point, essentially, of what is the best of it and what is the worst of it. I liked it. It definitely was a little bit too hectic, but I thought it was fun. I liked the introduction of Black Widow. I liked the villain. I actually liked the villain. I like the villain's suit in this one as well. I love the battle.
Yeah.
I love the battle at the very end where Stark and Rhodey are back to back. I love seeing War Machine in this movie. I think this is some of the greatest content you get from Rhodey across the entire MCU. Yep. That battle Absolutely. Is so cool. I also love the I'm not going to remember the name of it, but I love the attack where it's just like, hey, duck down, and then it's the laser that just 360s its way through the dome in the park. And Rhodey's like, oh, you could have opened with that move, you know? Like, you could have started with that. That chemistry right there is what makes that movie fantastic for me. But it's just not heavy enough a hitter against the top three, which I'm sure, Matt, you can you go first. I imagine we might have either... I think we definitely have the same number one, but I don't know what our 2 and 3s are. So, go ahead.
No, that's exactly what I was thinking. We probably have the same number one, but I guess we'll find out. So I guess I'll be able to tell by your facial reaction. Our listeners won't, but let's find out. My number 3 is Captain America: The First Avenger. It is a very, very enjoyable film that does not get as much love as it needs to. I think this movie is honestly right on par with my number 2 pick, Iron Man. I think that they really are right on the same level. I think what just puts Iron Man right above Cap is Robert Downey Jr. I think the main leading actor of RDJ against Chris Evans, I think Robert Downey Jr. is able to bring more to his film than Chris Evans is to his. Not saying Chris Evans is not great, because he is, but Tony Stark as Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark is just so charismatic, funny, endearing, lovable, lyrical. Like, you just love this guy, and he's just perfect. But Captain America: The First Avenger, again, is one of those movies I wish I watched more. In fact, maybe I'll put it on after this recording. Who knows? But it's a great movie. I love the villain Red Skull. I love the introduction to the Tesseract. All the comedy in the movie. I thought it's actually a pretty funny movie. Stanley Tucci in the beginning as the scientist that helps out Steve Rogers when he's little. And we didn't mention this, the visual effects team on this movie, making Chris Evans look like he's 5'0" and 90 pounds for the first half hour of the movie, and not making it a total distraction, is an insane achievement. It's so good how they were able to do that. But yeah, Cap's number 3, and Iron Man will be number 2. And my number 1, of course, is the Avengers, which is a fanboy's dream, myself included. I was 12 years old when I saw this movie in theaters, and it was everything I wanted and more. And to this day, it is still everything I want and more. It is the birth of the MCU. It is the first time we see these heroes team up, and it's nothing short of magic. The Avengers is my number 1 pick. So to recap my list, I have number 1, Avengers, number 2, Iron Man, number 3, Captain America: The First Avenger, 4, Thor, 5, Iron Man 2, and 6, The Incredible Hulk. Sean, your 1, 2, and 3.
My 1, 2, and 3 is I have Captain America at 3, and by default, I have Iron Man at 2, and of course, Avengers at 1. Matt said it all. The only things that I can really contribute are the reason why I put Iron Man over Captain America is Iron Man was the kicking down of the door. It was this boom, flashy. I think one of my favorite shots in early Marvel, and one of the top 10 in all of Marvel, is Tony Stark with his hands out wide as the bombs explode behind him in the very beginning of the film, because it shows where we started. It's the perfect starting ground of when you watch the movie and it starts, you don't expect this guy to be Iron Man. He looks like an asshole. He's selling weapons.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Sean.
He's selling weapons to both sides. Everyone is armed with Stark. And then it furthers the point when he's injured by a Stark rocket. It shows that he's not a good person. The Stark name is not a good name. They're just weapon mongers. And when he's taken hostage and he MacGyvers the first Iron Man suit out of just sheet metal and flamethrowers, you see, okay, maybe it's in there. Because he built that suit in secret. He built that in determination. He was dying. He was hooked up to the jankiest life support ever on film, and still was able to build this. Still able to incorporate his horrible life support system prototype into that suit to keep himself alive when trying to break out. And he one-man armies his way out with no combat experience, with no training. He doesn't even know how to use his own weapons. He makes it himself to show that he is that level of genius. And when he gets back to the States and he gets into recovery, that's when you see the seeds of Iron Man start. That's when you see this is a hero. And I think it makes sense to start the MCU with someone who wasn't a hero immediately. It's the same thing with Marvel. I think that I think that Captain America was, all right, you're already a few films in, now we're going to show you the Marvel side. But Iron Man was, we're going to show you that not all heroes need to be these glorified Boy Scouts in suits. I mean, granted, we just came off of gritty films like Watchmen, and we saw the weird of the Spider-Man movies, but there was still hope in a lot of those characters. You even had gritty heroes from Watchmen doing the right thing. You had Rorschach doing the noble things you saw in Watchmen, despite looking like a public menace. Peter Parker has always been a good character. He's always had the seeds of greatness sown in within him. And then, of course, we came out of the spandex era, where everyone was just, the first time you saw them when they were in spandex saving people. Iron Man in this film was the first time you saw a hero that just wasn't a hero. He had to be made into a hero. He had to build himself a hero. And that's essentially just Marvel saying we had to build our own studio. We had to gamble. We had to take risks. Tony in this movie is just Marvel personified at the time. We're going to take a risk. We have to put everything against the wall and get out of this cave, get out of this risky financial situation. And when they did it, when they got into the public eye, that is the end of the Iron Man film. Revealing himself to the world with the suit, standing proud. It is an allegory for this universe. It is an allegory for the film studio. And I say all of this, and I still put Avengers in front of it. I am a sucker for the allegory of Iron Man. But the Avengers film shows the payoff of the allegory that is Iron Man. Iron Man had to kick the door down for the Avengers to open the shop. It is a brilliant transition from first film to final film of the first part to show you, here's what we could have done, and here's what we're gonna do now that you trusted us. And it's a love letter to the people who stuck it out in the theaters. A love letter to everyone who supported them going out. That is why The Avengers sits with me. Yes, it's a phenomenal film. Yes, we've talked about every single great frame. But what those films mean is what makes those 1 and 2 for me.
Nice. I'm happy you touched on the ending of the first Iron Man film also, because we forgot to talk about that just insane ending, because it's the exact opposite of what you expect, because every single superhero movie up to this point, the superhero has been so hell-bent on keeping their secret identity hidden from the world. All the X-Men don't want to be known as mutants. Peter Parker doesn't want to be known as Spider-Man. The Fantastic Four kind of want to stay under wraps.
Bruce Wayne is still
like Iron Man.
No, you go ahead.
Iron Man is just okay. Sorry, Iron Man is the one hero to just be like, screw it. I'm Iron Man. I want the world to know it. I'm cocky, know it, but just I am Iron Man. It is it's insane. And then of course knowing what that line turns into, which we will get to in Phase 3. It's fantastic. It's so good. And yes, as you were saying, Bruce Wayne also, he doesn't want to be known as Bat. Yeah. He's the anti-hero. He's the anti-hero hero.
Yes. I was going to say there's a phenomenal old scene from like the original Adam West Batman where Batman has to talk to Bruce Wayne on the phone. And that scene to me epitomizes what superhero movies and superhero properties used to be in media. And I think of that and I know it's the weirdest thing to think about in juxtaposition, but every time I watch Iron Man, I think of that scene from the old Adam West Batman series. He just says, "Yeah, I'm Iron Man. Just deal with it. I'm not going to give you my secrets on how I made the suit. I'm not going to sell my weapons to the military. But I'm Iron Man. I'm cocky, I'm an asshole, and I'm going to do a good job." And I think about that the beginning of the superhero golden age where heroes did everything to protect themselves behind a mask. And here we have the modern age of superheroes where no one cares about the secret identity. It's a beautiful way to start what became the modern era of superheroes. It's what made them our American gods, essentially.
Totally. Totally, totally, totally. So, that is our massive dissection of Marvel Phase 1. Obviously, we are not done here. We have 2 other phases and I believe 17 other films to talk about between those other 2 phases.
Yep.
So we still have a lot of work to do.
It's a long
but
way.
we're going to have some help, thankfully. We're going to have some guests along the way. And because we're going to have some guests on our next Phase 2 and Phase 3 episodes, maybe expect some bloodbath segments because we'll have someone to judge now. Obviously, with Sean and I, we can't because it's only just the 2 of us. There's no one to judge us and ask us questions. So expect those coming up for Phase 2 and 3. We're sorry we couldn't give you one for Phase 1, but we kind of figured the Season 2 premiere should be just Sean and myself. That way we can kick things off, give you all a good welcome back and a good update as to what to expect. So, before we close out the episode, we're going to give you a brief update as to what's to come. Obviously, we're doing Phase 2 and Phase 3 next, which is a lot of fun, and we are adopting an every other week schedule for our normal episodes of the show.
Yes. So what we decided was summer is our time in real life for us to go work a job that pays us. We love this show. We love what we were able to do in Season 1, and we have a wonderful season prepared for you guys already for the remainder of the summer. But we're going to be busy, and neither of our work schedules are extremely concrete, me even less than Matt. So we decided to keep the show going, but to also keep it loose enough that we are able to wrap our schedule around it, because normally we booked the same hour, the same day for recording. We're probably never going to record on the same night for every episode for the rest of the summer. If we do, it'll be amazing. But we wanted to find a way to still provide you guys the show, our brand of content, and live and make money and survive. So we decided to do every other week. This week, starting, you're going to get a full podcast from us. The hour and a half-ish full episode. Us, the 2 of us, maybe a guest, most likely a guest from here on out, about the main topics. We're covering the 3 phases of Marvel first. Unlike Star Wars waiting with the full episodes in between, we are just doing the full rapid-fire episodes 3 in a row. But we wanted to space them out too. We couldn't put a whole nother episode of a podcast in between them, so what we decided to do was we have 6 episodes of this season set aside for solo endeavors. Matt and myself are going to create much more of a actually scripted, analytical, thought out presentation for you guys on various topics. A lot of our podcast is we come with a sticky note or a scratch paper sheet of notes and we just talk. We shoot from the hip, we speak from the heart, we give you guys what our main thoughts are that relate to the topic at hand. But we realize that if we can't exactly do a full show and just riff, we might as well take some of the time, give someone a break, and then put double the workload on ourselves, because we're crazy, and give you guys something even more thought out. So we're calling these new segments How Are Yous, a play off of the whole scene that gave this show our very name, Everything Is Fine, the exchange that Han Solo has with the Stormtroopers in Episode 4. So for each of our 3 How Are Yous, we are going to be presenting to you guys a shortened episode of the podcast where it's just us giving a dissertation on a topic of most of the time our choosing. I will admit that very soon I'm actually going to hold a little viewer submission thing on the Instagram, so please go look at that in the coming week after you hear this. I have a couple ideas, but I figured I'm going to throw one of my How Are You segments out to you guys. So I'm actually going to throw a poll up on there to see what do you guys want me to go out, research, spend way too much time organizing and writing, and present to you guys. I can probably present on most anything, unless it's like a weird curveball that you guys throw me. But I wanted to give one of my segments to you guys. Matt's got some really good ideas that he was telling me about. But I wanted to hear from you guys because I have way too many ideas that probably not a lot of you would want to hear. So, I'm eager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also have a few things of my own that I was thinking of, but I also I probably also do the viewer submission thing in the sense of asking y'all which one you would want to hear, because I have some interests of mine that I could talk about for hours upon hours that no one might want to hear, i.e., the New York Mets. So let me know what I'll throw up some I'll throw up some topics as well, and see what y'all want me to talk about, because obviously these are going to be listened to by you, and I would want to make sure that we're not boring you or talking about something that didn't interest you. And plus, we want to give back to you, the fans who have supported us all, and also going into this season of season 2. But yes, the first 3 phases of Marvel will be the kickoff episodes of the full season. We also have a few other episodes that we already have planned in terms of topics. I don't know if we want to reveal those just yet, but they're going to be very exciting.
Yes,
we have. And they're going to be really, really cool topics that I think will reach a lot of different people.
We have most of our episodes already planned, as opposed to last season. We already also have the ideas for our season finale in the middle of August. Already in the works. We have a very, very wonderful season ahead of you and a fantastic way to cap it off. So I hope that you guys stick with us for another round of this. And of course, further rounds in the future. I will also say that given our nature of we plan but also do a lot of last minute firing from the hip in these episodes, I think there is no greater way to determine whose voice you will be hearing solo than I have installed on Discord, which, by the way, today's episode was completely filmed over Discord. You may have heard the last time we did this in Season 1 during the TV episode, I can't speak, the TV episode with Matt's brother. We tested the Discord studio out, and it worked pretty good the first time, and it seemed to be working well during this recording as well. So, hopefully that is the case when you are listening to it. There are very minimal issues. But I figured there is no more perfect, more chaotic way to decide whose How Are You are going to hear first than via odds and even dice roll. So Matt, I have a dice roll prepped in a different Discord server with a dice roller bot that we use for our D&D campaigns. So I'm leaving the choice to you. Do you want to be odds or evens?
Even, please.
Evens? So if this roll is even, and I promise you that I will be telling the truth, so help me God. If it is even, you'll be hearing Matt next week. If it is odd, you'll be hearing me next week. So, without further ado, our dice roll is on a 1d20. It is an 11. You'll be hearing me. I can see Matt's face lighting up, too. Okay.
I'm lighting up. I just think it's funny.
I guess I gotta get that submission box set up very soon then. Along with the advertisements for this weekend. So, I guess you'll be hearing a dissertation from me next Sunday on a topic of y'all's choosing. I'm giving you my first one. I'll give you guys my first one. I'll do the rest of my crazy machinations throughout the summer. But this one's for y'all.
Okay.
But without...
Alrighty.
I think that was
well,
a successful
we thank you all.
you take it. You take it.
I think it was Yeah, no, I think it was a great one. Also, I apologize if you hear any delays. We are obviously recording. We live 3 hours away from each other. So there was literally no feasible way of getting in the same spot for this because we have jobs that we have to do. in our hometown, so there was no way I was going to commute 3 hours or Sean the other way. So we apologize for delays because sometimes we did talk over each other in this episode. But again, we want to thank you for joining us for the season 2 premiere of the Everything Is Fine podcast. I think I speak for Sean in saying that we missed doing this. We hadn't recorded an episode in about a month, and it's a lot of fun being able to talk about crazy stuff and stuff that we really just are super passionate about, and having you all listen to it. We really do appreciate you if you stuck around with us and are going to try out season 2 as well. I know we're having a blast doing it. I hope you're having a blast listening to us. So yeah, that's about it for this week's episode. Stay tuned for next week's Sean's first How Are You that we just determined was going to happen because he rolled an 11. And then after that, 2 weeks from the release of this episode, you'll be hearing us talk about Phase 2 with a very special guest. But yeah, I think that it's a great way to kick off Season 2. And Sean, if you want to take us out, that'd be my pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen who joined us today, just remember that no matter how crazy life gets, everything is fine.